Everybody knows that if you surf the web long enough, you're gonna find some pretty sick shit. This is especially true if you intentionally dive into the dark underbelly of the internet. I've seen quite a few things I don't care to admit to, but one thing that I'll always remember is a site called normalpornfornormalpeople.com. The first strange thing about the site was that I didn't find it by actually looking for it. It was emailed to me by someone I didn't know. The email was as follows. Hi there. Found this site. It's very nice. Thought you might like. normalpornfornormalpeople.com. Pass it on. For the good of mankind. Pretty standard issue chain letter, although the URL and the last remark really piqued my curiosity. I was having a very boring day when I got this, so I made sure my antivirus was working and then I clicked on it. It was a very average, very generic looking website. It gave the impression that the creators just barely gave a shit about making it look professional. The author seemed to have a very tenuous grasp on English, and on the front page was a long, boring, and incoherent rant that I don't remember or have saved. The site had a strange tagline, which even today people haven't figured out the meaning of. It said this: Normal porn for normal people, a website dedicated to the eradication of abnormal sexuality. And from the sound of that, I wasn't sure whether I was here to watch porn or if I'd stumbled onto some kind of eugenics program. But I was here now, and I was very, very curious to see what normal people were interested in. So I scrolled down through the rant and nothing. The page didn't seem to link to anywhere else, and I was about to leave when I noticed that every word of the rant was its own hyperlink. I clicked one of them, and I was sent to a white page with a very long list of links in the form of /random letters. So I stopped for a minute and asked myself if I really wanted to waste God knows how much time clicking random links that would likely give my computer a virus and destroy it. I figured I'd try for maybe 5 minutes, just to see if anything came up, if you know what I mean. I clicked one of the links and was sent to another page. This page apparently had totally different URLs than the last one. I was just about to say fuck it when I clicked on the third link, and a video download came up. It was called peanut.avi. A 30-minute video of a man, a woman, and a dog in a kitchen. The woman made a peanut butter sandwich, and the man set it down for the dog to eat. This was all that happened for 30 minutes. It was obvious that the cameraman had to stop filming and wait until the dog was ready to eat again, and the dog seemed rather sick by the end of it. Now I know what you're thinking. What the fuck does that have to do with porn? Well, I don't have a clue. I've seen a little over 24 videos from the site, and the majority had no sexual activity at all. After watching peanut.avi, I went on a certain image board I frequent to play online show and tell, like I always do with weird shit like this. But someone had already made a thread about it, a guy who'd received the same chain letter that I did. The image board thread had lots of people with nothing better to do other than dig through the site, and that's how I saw the rest of the videos. Most of those 24 videos were very uneventful, and consisted of people talking to the cameraman in a room with nothing in it, but a desk and a few chairs. I mean literally, nothing on the walls, or in terms of furniture either. The whole room had a very cold, sterile feel to it. The conversations were idle banter about previous jobs or embarrassing childhood moments. I kept expecting some kind of discussion about what the people were filming or what the site was about, but of course, nothing. You would never know these videos had anything to do with porn if you saw it out of context. I'll say one thing though, the people who appeared in these videos were very attractive. However, the other videos that actually did feature content I suppose could be called sexual is where things got a little weird. I'm going to give you some brief descriptions of the stranger videos. If you're really eaten up with curiosity, you can try to hunt them down on a torrent site. The first video, lickedclean.avi. A 10-minute video filmed by a hidden camera in which we see a repairman working on a washing machine for the first 2 minutes. When it's fixed, the repairman talks to the owner briefly and then leaves. The owner checks to make sure the repairman is gone and then begins to lick all over the top of the washing machine. This goes on for 7 minutes. Jimbo.avi. A 5-minute video of an obese mime performing his act. It was actually pretty funny, particularly one part where he pretends to pull up a chair and then he pretends to break it because of his weight. In the last 30 seconds of the video, the camera cuts to static briefly and cuts back to the man sobbing quietly, still wearing a mime outfit and makeup. Some kind of obscure fetish? I don't know. The next is Diana.avi. A 4-minute video in which the cameraman talks to a woman in a room different from the interview room. This room looks like one you'd find in a normal person's house. Exactly where they are is never specified, as Diana only talks about her violin playing. She obviously plays her violin, but keeps getting distracted by something. I didn't notice this until someone on the image board thread pointed it out, but if you look at the mirror in the background, you can see a fat man in a chicken mask, banging his head against the wall, butt naked. Jessica.avi. Another 4-minute cameraman video. This time he's outside a house, talking to another young woman. They talk about canoe rides. The camera zooms out to reveal the city streets behind them occasionally. The strange thing is that no one so far has been able to identify where this street is. Guesses have ranged everywhere from Europe to Australia to the Philippines, but there's yet to be a match for the street shown in the video. Tonguetied.avi. The first 5 minutes consist of an elderly woman making out with a mannequin. The video cuts out like it did in Jimbo.avi halfway through, and the scene is then a group of mannequins huddled together in a circle around the camera. The lights have been dimmed, and the elderly woman is nowhere to be seen. From this point on, there is no sound. Stumps.avi. 5-minute long video where a man with no legs is attempting to break dance on a DDR mat in what looks like the kitchen from Peanut.avi, but much dirtier. There's radio playing music unseen in the background, but it stops at the 4-minute mark when the man collapses on the mat in exhaustion. He breathes heavily and pleads with someone off-screen to let him rest. This off-screen person becomes terrifyingly enraged and yells at him to keep dancing, which he does. You can then hear this off-screen person begin to scream as the video ends abruptly. Privacy.avi. The woman from Diana.avi is laying on a mattress in the interview room, while the man from the Stumps.avi walks around on his hands, wearing some kind of goblin mask. Both of them are butt naked. The door in this room was always closed in other videos, but now it's open. In this video, the only light is in the room, and the hallway is dark. Near the end of the video, you can see an animal quickly run through the hallway. And finally, the last video we uncovered is useless.avi. In this 18-minute video, a blonde woman from one of the previous interview videos is tied down to a mattress in the interview room. She attempts to scream, but her mouth is taped over. After 7 minutes, a man in a black suit and mask opens the door, but he doesn't enter. He holds the door open for the animal that was running in the hall in the previous video. It's revealed to be an adult chimpanzee, its hair shaved and its entire body painted red. When the chimp enters the room, the masked man closes the door behind it. The chimpanzee sniffs the air for a moment, it may have been blind, and notices the woman tied to the mattress. It goes into a frenzy and begins to maul her. The attack goes on for a grueling 7 minutes until the woman finally dies. The chimp then eats the flesh from her corpse for 4 minutes as the video ends. The image thread exploded with activity after this video was uncovered, and people discussed it long into the night. When I came back to the image board the next day, I found that it had been deleted. I tried to start another one, and they banned me. I tried emailing the guy who sent me the chain letter with the site's URL. I sent him 5 messages and never got a response. I've tried to discuss this website on various places and have been banned frequently. The site itself also was deleted about 3 days after useless.avi was uncovered, likely because someone contacted the authorities about it. The only proof that normal porn for normalpeople.com ever existed was a few screenshots people took and videos from the site that people saved and uploaded on torrents. The most popular of which was useless.avi, which found its way onto a few gore sites. Wherever you upload them to, all of the videos get deleted after a while. It's a very strange thing, and I'd like to know who that woman was, and what happened to the chimpanzee. My brother always had a dream of being a great filmmaker. For as long as I can remember, it's been his obsession. He got a video camera for his 8th birthday and would literally film everything with it, even the most mundane things. He would have us do interviews for the camera, make little movies for himself. I thought it was cute at first. I really did. I would always help him with whatever little project he was doing this time. As time went on, though, something started to change. I can't really say what made him the way he was, but he became increasingly arrogant and increasingly difficult. Our parents definitely spoiled him, spent a small fortune making sure he got the education he needed to pursue his dream of becoming a director, paid for any of the expensive equipment he needed for making and editing his own little movies, helped pay the salaries of any crew or actors he hired for the little short films he produced. Maybe it was that which made him become so arrogant and mean-spirited, but increasingly he became that worst kind of cliché, the artist obsessed with their vision and treating everyone in their lives like crap, the self-centered petulant child in an adult's body. I'd like to say that I called him out on any of this, but the sad fact is, I went along right with it. It started in his teens. Verbal abuse and the occasional slap any time that I didn't do something right or quickly enough for his liking. I should have stood up to him, told him to get lost, but I found myself totally under his thumb, unable to say no or simply get him out of my life. To be honest, looking back, I can see just how unhealthy the whole thing was. Now, before you go getting the wrong idea here, there never was anything incestuous here. My brother was just a bully, a little tyrant who enjoyed bossing people around, and I basically became his personal servant. He would belittle me and everything I thought, said, or tried to do. Anytime I tried to build myself up, he'd tear me down and make me feel like I couldn't accomplish anything on my own. Couldn't even survive out there without him. I should have known better, I suppose, but it had started from when we were so young that honestly a part of me came to genuinely believe the things he said. A part of me was too scared of trying to make it out there in the big wide world by myself, that I put up with my brother's constant bullying and taunting and increasingly shrill, angry demands because I was too scared of being alone, being cut off from the only family I had left. Our parents had passed away by this point, and we had no contact with the rest of the family. Without my brother, I'd be all by myself. His overbearing presence in my life had prevented me from making any real friends, and the thought of trying to build a life for myself, by myself, was one that just terrified me. So I did what I was told. He would say, "Joan, get me a coffee," and I'd drive all the way across town to the one Starbucks he liked to get him coffee. He'd say he needed extras, and I'd devote weeks of my life to arranging and carrying out interviews. He'd demand some inexpensive piece of equipment, and I'd spend however much it cost to get it. That was my life now. I was my brother's personal assistant and maid. The subject of my brother's short films and mini documentaries had become increasingly dark and surreal over the years. He would create short, strange, and frightening little pieces designed only to unsettle and scare, or sometimes just ones that were so bizarre, so utterly devoid of plot, logic, or reason, that it was impossible to tell what, if anything, he was trying to achieve or convey with them. His documentaries were much the same. He would either film about gang crime, serial killers, or rapists, or else create disjointed scenes. He once filmed a dog, starving and injured on the street for several hours. just filming it struggling to move, to breathe. He just filmed its pain. Some nights when I went down to get a glass of water, I would see him sitting there in the lounge, in the dark, watching these movies he made, just staring at the screen. And then one day, he told me about what his newest film was to be about. It turned out that he'd begun to hear stories of an urban legend in the film industry. It wasn't something that was widely talked about or acknowledged, and the people who did talk about it always seemed to do so with a certain nervousness and paranoia, as if afraid that even mentioning it was dangerous. It was called Better Films. Supposedly, it was a studio or individual who made incredibly strange movies. None of those we talked to who would admit to having watched a Better Films production would go into any detail about what was on the tapes. And the films were only available on VHS from what we could uncover. But all of them seemed to be incredibly disturbed by what they had seen. One had gone so far as to remove anything from their home that could play video or audio. A guy who ran a small DVD and video store told us that he'd met with some representatives of Better Films just once. A pair of men dressed in red suits. He described them as looking like they'd been mutilated and claimed that one had been missing an eye and an ear, while another was minus a hand and his nose. The scarring around these wounds looked ugly and raw. They'd given him a business card, which had nothing on it except for the logo, a cartoonish childlike drawing of a frowning face, and the tagline, "Making better films for a better audience," along with a website address where they claimed he could purchase their titles for his store if he wished to help support independent art. He checked it out, expecting some kind of artsy foreign stuff in black and white. He had instead found a site full of strange and confusing clips that left him scratching his head, and that provided no clear way to order anything. He said the whole web page appeared to be in Japanese, and yet a week later, a black bin bag was on the front step of his shop, and inside were several tapes, all with the Better Films logo on their labels. We asked him if he still had the tapes, and my brother in particular was very insistent that we get to watch them. The man refused, and my brother offered him increasingly large sums of money to buy or borrow one of the tapes. Finally, the man just held up a finger to my brother's lips before speaking. "Now you listen to me, and listen good, boy. I've seen your type. I know the look you got in your eye right now. I get a lot of fucking weirdos in here, browsing the adult section, asking if I got anything stronger. I know what you're after, and I know what you're thinking. So I'm going to tell you this, and then you're going to get the fuck out of my store. What's on those tapes ain't no illegal little thrill for some gorehound trying to find himself a real-life snuff movie. What's on those tapes isn't anything like what you're thinking. What's on those tapes is way fucking worse than anything you could imagine. And I ain't selling them or renting them to nobody, especially not some little half-wit pervert with more money than sense. Now I'm going to tell you for the last time, I ain't giving them to you, and you can get the fuck out of my shop." My brother stormed out in a rage with me following close behind. As I left the store, the owner called out to me. I turned to see him looking at me with an expression of genuine concern on his face now. "You want my advice? Things he's looking into, you don't want none to do with it." I suppose I should have taken his advice, but by this point I doubt there was anything that could convince me to abandon my brother. So great was the hold he had over me, and so I continued to assist him as he dug deeper and deeper into the mystery of Better Films. We managed to piece a few things together. The earliest encounter anyone seemed to have had with her work seemed to be in the mid-60s. One person we spoke to claimed that he'd known someone who'd been involved in a movie for them in the mid-70s. A porn star who'd been hired right off the set of a film he'd been doing and had gone missing for almost 7 months. He'd come back with a lot of cash and a hell of a lot of bad dreams. Another said that the company went back even further, that there'd been something called Better Productions, back before there'd even been silent films. Said her mother had told her stories that she'd heard from her grandmother, who'd heard them from her grandmother. Some spooky boogeyman stuff about some performer named Elizabeth Walker. We even found someone who claimed to have grown up watching a TV show Better Films had made. Sunshine Street, she said it had been called, and she went on and on about how strange it had been and how she'd always remembered that logo. It was the first thing that had come to mind when she'd heard the name. She said it always used to creep her out, the way the frown would curve into a smile at the end of each episode. The animation looked eerie, and that was how she described it. And then my brother came home one day with a woman who he claimed was a producer who worked at Better Films. I was dumbfounded. For all the work he had put into this, I hadn't expected us to get anywhere. To be honest, I was pretty much convinced the whole thing was just some ghost story. That if there had ever even been a Better Films, there was nothing more to it than some low-budget production company that had made a few creepy little flicks and then folded up. All the weirdness around it, I'd put that down to just people making stuff up. Or at the very least, people having heard various stories about Better Films from unreliable sources and then passing them along. But here was someone who claimed to work for the company, in the flesh. She introduced herself as Miss Kismet. Her hair was bright red, almost certainly dyed. I can't believe that any hair would be naturally as bright as hers looked. She dressed in a red suit, and like the men our friend at the video store described, she looked as though someone had gone out of their way to hurt her. One of her eyes was missing, as was an ear and her nose. 3 fingers were missing from her right hand as well. I tried not to stare, but all of these looked like they had been done so crudely, so violently that it made me wince. She and my brother spoke at length for some time. I wasn't allowed to listen in or take part in whatever they were talking about, but after a while they stepped out of the lounge and my brother asked to speak with me alone for a moment. He told me that he had convinced the woman to let him actually come to the filming of one of Better Films' movies and to meet with the director responsible for their work. To actually interview people who worked at the highest levels of this production company and get the real story about what it was that they did. However, to secure this, he'd had to offer the woman a form of payment, he said. And that payment was her getting to spend a night with me, where I would do anything she wished. I could have slapped him. But instead, I just yelled, told him that this was way too much, that I wasn't going to have him selling me like his personal property, like a slave. He shrugged, seeming not to care about my anger, my hurt. It's not that big of a deal. You like women, right? You'll probably enjoy it. And she's promised that you won't be hurt in any way. His tone was cold and emotionless. It was clear that he could care less whether I'd be hurt or not. He couldn't care less what this person he knew nothing about and had only just met wanted to do with me. That he didn't even give a damn about my well-being or my safety. And I was just another tool for him to use to make his damn movies. He stared at me for a few moments, his expression totally unreadable. And then, slowly, he spoke. If you don't like it, then of course I can't force you to do it. You can say no. You can refuse. Just like I can refuse to let you continue to live here with me. Just like I can refuse to support you financially anymore. But don't worry. I'm sure there are plenty of job opportunities for ugly, witless, talentless little things who barely made it through high school with no real skills or likable qualities. I'm sure the local burger joint is just desperate for someone to mop their floors and clean out their grease traps. And who knows? Maybe after a year or two of that, you'll be able to afford a place that barely has any roaches or rodents scurrying about in it. It's not like anyone will be able to stand you long enough to come visit, so really, it won't even matter what your house looks like. You'll be the only one living out your sad, lonely life in it. I felt like I would cry. I wanted to tell him he was wrong and to go to hell. I wanted to storm out and never see or talk to him again. But part of me kept telling myself that he was right, that I was everything he said I was, a loser, an idiot without any skills or good qualities about me. A stupid, pathetic child who wouldn't survive without him. I felt like garbage, like dirt, I felt the way he had always made me feel for as long as I could remember now. And meekly, I just mumbled that I would do it, that I would agree to spending a night with Miss Kismet. We met at a motel, a sleazy-looking place on the edge of town. She had sorted out a room for the night and told me to come alone with one of my brother's cameras. I was terrified, more and more as I walked to the room she had told me to come to, terrified of what she might do to me, or what could happen. If she killed me, my brother would probably help her hide the body. I knocked, and I heard her familiar voice tell me to enter. The room was pitch black as I stepped in, almost impossible to see. I could make out Miss Kismet sitting in a chair beside the bed. There was a knife on the table beside her. I've never felt more scared, more utterly frightened for my life than I did in that moment. "Sit on the bed and start filming," she said. My legs were shaking. I somehow managed to make myself walk over to it and do as she asked, sitting down and swinging the camera up to film her. I began to ask what she wanted me to do, what she wanted me to film, and she just told me to keep the camera rolling and not stop until she instructed me to, and nothing else. She whistled loudly, and from the bathroom a dog came limping out. It looked like it hadn't been fed in days, thin and very unhealthy looking. As I watched, Miss Kismet picked up the knife from the table, and she began to slice lines into her hand. My jaw dropped. As I watched, and as I filmed, she cut deeply into her own flesh, blood beginning to pour from the wound. She lowered her hand to within reach of the starving animal and allowed the dog to lap at the blood now trickling from the fresh cuts. After a while, she would withdraw her hand and repeat the process, cutting into her hand and then her arm, slicing deep wounds into her skin and letting the dog drink her blood. I felt ill. Worse was the look on her face as she did it, that rictus grin that never changed, never left her. She kept that horrible forced smile on her face no matter how much or how deeply she cut herself, looking like something out of a nightmare. She sat there in the dark, smiling that awful smile. Finally, she put the knife down and reached into the drawer of the table it had laid upon. She withdrew a pair of scissors and, as I watched, placed the little finger of her right hand in between them. Slowly, she closed the blades around her finger. Do you know what that sounds like? The crunch of bone as a finger is severed by a pair of scissors? I didn't, but I do now. I could feel the vomit rising in my throat as she slowly cut off that finger, the grin still fixed to her face as she cut through the flesh and bone. It fell to the floor, and the dog pounced on it. And finally, she told me I could stop filming. I was shaking, feeling ill, feeling worse than I had expected to feel. I didn't know what this was or why she had asked me to do this, and I didn't want to know. And then suddenly her arm shot out, grabbing me by the leg. Her face inches from mine, replaced by a look of pure terror, of the worst kind of fear I had ever seen on another person's face. Her eye darted side to side, her body shook. I could feel the blood from her fresh injuries soaking into my clothes. Help me. The words were desperate, spoken as if it actually caused her pain to say them, coming out as a broken and pathetic whimper. For the love of God, please. She's gonna kill us all. Don't you understand? She's gonna kill us all. And then she stopped. Her words were cutting off. A little squeak of pain came from her as if someone had grabbed her by the throat. And that's when I realized we weren't alone in that hotel room. Standing in the dark, in one corner of the room, was another woman. She was dressed in a tuxedo with a featureless white latex mask over her face. There were no eye holes in the mask, and yet somehow, as she stood there motionless in the dark, I felt that she was looking at us, that she could see us and could see me, that she was studying me intently, watching me very closely indeed. I felt more afraid than ever before. The motionless woman in the white mask stood silently in the blackness, made my heart pound, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I had to get out of this room. I stood up, turned, and ran. I ran out of the room, down the stairs, and out into the parking lot. I didn't even bother to get into my car. I just ran around into the street and away from that motel. Away from Miss Kismet. Away from the woman in the white mask. It was the next day that Miss Kismet showed up at my brother's home. She was all smiles once again and thanked me for my time. My brother had asked no questions about what had happened, most likely because he couldn't care less. And he was happy to hear that Miss Kismet would now arrange for him a meeting with her director at the set of the current production they were working on right now. Kismet made it clear that this invitation was for my brother only, which suited him just fine. He told me to stay at the house and work on editing the footage we'd put together so far, and said he'd be back as soon as possible with the interviews with the director and actors involved in Better Film's newest movie. He was beaming, clearly happy that he'd gotten his way, that now he would get to finish his movie with actual footage of what Better Films did. As much as I hated him, in a way I wanted to tell him not to go. In a way, I was actually scared for him, worried about what might happen. He was a bastard, but he was my brother. But I kept my mouth shut and I let him go off with Miss Kismet, waiting for his return. And I waited, and I waited. And after several hours passed, I started to worry. When he hadn't returned at the day's end, I called the police. They told me that I had to wait a few days to file a missing persons report, and told me not to worry, that most of the time people showed up long before that time had passed. But my brother didn't. And so I went to the cops and I told them about what he'd been working on and about Miss Kismet. I described her to them and told them about Better Films, which they reacted to skeptically. And I can't say I blame them. I told them about the woman in the white mask, and they looked at me like I was crazy or making it up. Again, I really can't hold that against them. The whole thing was so bizarre and unsettling that I don't know that I would have believed it if someone told me about it. They told me they would look into it and said they would be in touch with any developments in the case, anything they managed to turn up. They told me not to worry about my brother, that they were certain he would turn up. But the longer I waited without news, the less I worried about it, the less I cared about him at all. Finally free of his bullying, his endless taunts and insults, I found myself becoming more confident and more assured. I began to go out more. I began to talk to people, to actually start to make friends. I even met a girl at a little bar, not far from my brother's house, who I began to see as more than friends. I started sorting out job interviews. I started feeling good about myself, looking in the mirror and not feeling like crap for once. I felt happy, actually happy for the first time in a very long time indeed. I felt like I had worth and value, and that I could make it on my own. A package showed up here a few months ago. It had no stamp, no address, and nothing written on it. Just a brown package, left on the doorstep of my brother's place. I opened it up to find a video cassette inside, with a label on it that simply read, "We make documentaries too." I was worried now, nervous, and yet curious at the same time, not wanting to know what was on the tape and needing to know at the same time as well. I walked over to the television and slid the tape into the old VCR my brother still owned that I had never even bothered to throw out since he had gone missing, and the tape began to play. It was footage of us going around to talk to people about Better Films, footage of us going into the video store where we'd met the man who claimed to have seen some of Better Films' movies, footage of us going to the homes of those people we'd interviewed about this, footage of us walking down the street going to and from places. On several occasions, it zoomed in on my brother. Whoever was behind the camera seemed to be focused in on him. I stared at it, a chill running through me. How long had they been filming us for? How long had they been following us, watching our every move? How long had they known about us before Miss Kismet had met with my brother? The tape went to static for a few moments and I thought it was over. But I was wrong. Red light spilled out of the screen as the picture returned, bringing with it an agonized chorus of screams and howls of agony. And on the screen was my brother. He was suspended by what looked like metal hooks, rusty metal hooks, his body hanging from them in a veritable maze of razor wire. The wire was around his body, cutting into his flesh, seeming to move like metal snakes. Whoever was manipulating the wire was off screen, but the effects were very clear. He was missing a hand, a leg, and his ears, and his mouth was wide open. Screams were all around. The source of them was not visible, but I could hear what sounded like dozens of voices all screaming with him, all howling and shrieking in pain. His eyes were wide and terrified, his body jerking and twitching as he screamed the same words over and over again, the same two words. Help me. I stood there, staring at the scene for a moment. My brother was trapped somewhere, in what appeared to be a private hell on earth, having God knows what else done to him by these people for reasons I would probably never know. I looked at it, I walked over to the set, and I turned off the tape. I unplugged the VCR and the TV, and knowing that I would never mention this tape to anyone I knew, I whispered a few words to myself. No, I'm not gonna help. I took the tape, and later that night I burned it. And to this day, my brother has never been found. And as for those people at Better Films, I don't know who the fuck they are, and I don't want to know who they are. I've been on welfare for the past 10 years. I look for jobs as much as I can, but when the nearest 9 to 5's a 2-hour bus ride away and wants a college degree just to consider you, it's kind of hard. I still look, but let's be honest. I know the odds are against me. But a guy's got to have something to do, right? So my thing to do is porn. I got nothing else, and I'm a man. But my internet connection's shit because fucking Comcast has a monopoly around here, so I can't watch porn online like a normal person. I've got to rent it from a shop a while away. And the worst part of it is that I can barely afford it. I can't afford to get laid, and that's bad enough. But I can't even afford to buy my own porn. It's like the fucking cherry on a pile of horse shit. I pay my rent for my shitty studio apartment, and I pay for my food, and then I've got about $100 to take me through the month without going insane. So, I rent porn. And not the good stuff either. None of the big name studios. No, that stuff is top shelf. So it's apparently too good for people like me. I go for the bottom shelf. $1 a day rentals from the small studios. Half the time you can tell that they're shot with GoPro and mashed together with Windows Movie Maker. I guess I'm supporting indie artists, but who cares? Most of their stuff sucks. I can't even get into it at times. But I can't stop coming back for more. Oh, no. And last month, I got into big trouble because I didn't have the dollar in my pocket that I needed to rent one of those crap DVDs. I tried to talk to the clerk. I asked him to cut me a break since I'm a regular and all that. But he wasn't having any of it. That fucking hippie. He's the reason why this country's going to hell in a handbasket. Anyway, he kept saying no and no and no again, no matter what I said, until I finally reached into my pocket, grabbed something, and slammed it on the counter. I didn't even know what it was. There, I said. What'll that get me? It was a quarter and a dime, and that was all. 35 fucking cents was all I had to my name. At first I thought he was going to laugh and kick me out of the shop, but then he pointed down at the bottom shelf of a rack of weird stuff. I don't usually get into that since it's too expensive, but there was one DVD down there that was only 30 cents a night. You know how they say you get what you pay for? Well, it's true. This movie, when they printed the cover, they must have misaligned the paper sheets because everything was a little crooked. There were a couple of typos on the back too, and the title was the most generic title I'd ever seen in my life. Obviously, I'm not going to say what it is, but if you guess something like POV, neighborhood moms, you'd be pretty close to the money. The cover photo was of this dark Mexican chick with a really nasty snaggletooth, wearing a bikini and looking at the camera. Now, usually porn cover photos are exciting, you know? The girl will have an inviting expression on her face like she wants to be there. But this one was like nothing. Nothing was going on with it. Nothing at all. She was there, but she wasn't there. I can't explain it any other way. But whatever. I took the DVD and told the clerk to keep the change. It's a long walk home. It always is. But I kind of like it. Drives the anticipation up, Gets the blood flowing. So by the time I got home, I was ready to watch it. I popped in the DVD, sat down, and opened up a bag of Cheetos. That's one good thing about the movie. There's no frickin' DVD menu to bother with. It just gets right to it. The movie is shot POV style, so there's this dude kind of laying down in a room of some kind. The chick from the cover walks through a door with a big frosted glass panel, kind of dances a little bit, and then crawls towards the camera. She starts to look at the guy, and then she starts doing her thing. No story, no acting, no bullshit, nothing. Great, right? Maybe not. To be honest, she's not really good at this. I guess I gotta give her credit though, for trying. Most chicks don't even pursue these sorts of career paths. I watched about halfway through the video, and I kept eating the Cheetos and watching away. Nothing better to do, I guess. Plus, it was kind of funny seeing this awkward woman. But I started to notice something really weird about the video. She kept looking off screen. Now, editing takes care of that in the professional stuff, but even for a homemade one, she looked off screen a lot. And not at the dude who was filming either. She kept looking above and to the right of him. And every time she did that, she'd kind of wince and get back to what she was doing, like she had something to prove. It was like there was something that scared her a lot. And then I realized something else. The room the film was shot in, I knew where it was. I worked in that building for 3 years. The trucking company I used to work for leased it. Now, that was 10 years ago, and I heard the company shut down after they fired me. Probably because they fired me. But I still remembered where the building was, so I figured, damn, why not check the place out? I'd never been to a porn studio before, and besides, I'd get a kick out of seeing my old office used as a set. Hell, if I showed up, maybe they'd even give me a job. Now, it's a ways to that part of the city, like a long ways, probably 8-9 miles, and I don't have a car or a bike, so I had to walk it. But hey, it's an adventure, right? So I grabbed my flashlight and a beer and I got going. Bugs were fucking everywhere. And it was probably 80 degrees, 80% humidity, even though it was after 8 o'clock at night. Whatever, it's Florida. I'm used to it. Eventually I go to the building, and I got pissed off right away. The damn thing was shuttered. Probably had been for years. There were plants growing over it and shit, and half the windows were busted up, and the other half were boarded. I cursed and threw my bottle at the front door, and wouldn't you know it, the damn thing creaked open. So I decided to help myself and walk inside. It was dark, so I turned on my flashlight, and I'm glad I did that right away. The floor was covered with needles and shit, like literal human shit. The place stunk up a storm, but I figured, I've come this far. It'd be a shame to turn back now. So I kept going. Somebody else must have leased the place after my company left it. The layout had changed a lot, and they converted the lobby to even more office rooms and cubicles. There were a lot of corners there, a lot of things I couldn't see. A lot of places where anything might pop out and kill me. Bum with a knife, a punk with a gun, a meth head, anything. But fuck it, I'm not turning back. I made my way through the lobby, or what was once the lobby. Since I was the only person there, and since the whole building is just plain concrete block, my footsteps echoed a lot. At least I hoped they were echoes. I got to the hallway that led to my office, and that was the worst part of it. My flashlight's not that bright, and the hallway is long, so you can't really see the end of it when it's dark like that. I admit, I got kind of scared at that point. I started walking as quietly as I could, and I tried to hold my breath. My flashlight was a dead giveaway though, but I figured it was worth it. Going down that hallway in pitch blackness, I don't know if I could have done it, not without the flashlight. Eventually I got to my office, and the number painted above the door must have faded years ago, but I recognized it right away. 5th on the right, and the only one with the glass panel over the door. They took out the solid door after some bitch from HR caught me watching porn during my lunch break. And it was my own fucking lunch break. You know what I mean? You'd think you could do whatever you want to on your own time, but not here, evidently. Anyhow, I opened the door and found nothing. Just nothing. Not even any dust. And that's what tipped me off that something was weird about this place. But it didn't take me a minute to realize what. The whole room smelled like laundry, like bleach. And when I looked really closely at the floor trim, I could see that the bottom edges of it were kind of stained, kind of eaten away at, like the whole floor had been doused with bleach. I ran the spot of my flashlight along with the floor at the wall to see if there were any other clues, and that's when I saw it. That ugly yellow snaggletooth right there on the edge of the floor. I picked it up and had a look at it. The blood on it was still purple, like it hadn't been out in the air for that long. I walked out of the room holding it in my hand, but I kept smelling the bleach. And when I looked down the hallway, I didn't see any dust or needles or anything either. So I put the tooth in my pocket and I kept going. The clean trail led all the way down the hall. Like, all the way down the hall. All the way up to a door that I kicked down, and then it continued down these old wooden stairs, and then it just ended. All of a sudden, the smell of bleach just ended. But that was fine. There was a really obvious trail through the dirt and the gravel out toward the woods. And then there was a gap in the bushes. And then there was a creek. And then, well, and then is the reason that I don't watch porn anymore. Or rent blow-up dolls, or any of that shit. It's 8 or 9 miles to the building, and I don't got a car or a bike. But I kinda like it. Drives the anticipation up, you know? Gets the blood flowing. He designed the system on basic human decency, and it failed almost immediately. Such abuses of goodwill have plagued mankind as far back as history goes, and as recently as the DIY video rental fiasco at the local water park. In hindsight, the idea for the do-it-yourself video rental could hardly be described more positively than absurd and utterly stupid. He created the system after video rentals lost their prominence in a last-ditch effort to squeeze out any remaining revenue from tapes we still owned. Essentially, the system operated like a lending library with a tip jar set out. Murphy, my boss and the mastermind behind the project, emptied the tip jar into the register every evening. From my vantage point working as a cashier, I could observe just how pathetically minuscule the daily profits were compared to the water parks. People just refused to pay when not supervised. Even from the start, I had never been on board with the idea. When he first suggested it, I had voiced concern that people wouldn't respect the rules. Murphy responded that if we treat the customers like children, they'll behave like children. But if we treat them like adults, they'll behave like we want. I suppose that's a nice sentiment, but it's entirely failed to account for teenagers. In addition to consistently checking out movies without paying, local high school kids would also take it upon themselves to relieve our stock of children's movies and adult films. Then they'd swap the tapes and return them to the shelves. I heard that they called it the Pornography Game. After a long series of customer complaints, Murphy bestowed me the honorary title of Video Rental Quality Assurance Manager. As such, I got to check that every tape contained the right movie. Despite being hired as a cashier at a water park, I now found myself digging through old videotapes for a living. It didn't take long for the teenagers to adjust their game accordingly. They began writing over the tapes themselves, instead of just swapping out the cases, so I would have to physically watch every movie to guarantee that nothing had been altered. Because they would sometimes just change out the audio or tamper with the final scenes of the films. I constantly had to view the entirety of the movies with sound to ensure their quality. I tried persuading Murphy to drop the project, as he was losing money with me working the rental full-time, but he wouldn't hear it. It seemed utterly absurd that I couldn't just run the place like any other rental store, or stop the teenagers as they checked out their movies. But Murphy remained adamant in his resolve and seemed to think that such a thing would go against the spirit of the project. The DIY rental was his idea, and we'd all be damned if it didn't work out just fine. Surely the project could function if Murphy would either ditch the porn or the other movies, but still he refused, informing me that those were the only two kinds of films ever rented. And thus my days went by. Of both genres, I memorized every movie in our catalog. I knew every line before it was spoken, every character before they appeared. I would sit in the back of the rental area, scornfully watching every teenager check out their products. My lips moved subconsciously along with the dialogue. I began to work late into the evenings, growing embarrassed when customers, whom I often knew, observed me watching porn for a living. My hours drifted later and later into the night, until I would arrive after the water park itself closed, just to watch the videos. I kept tabs on when each video was checked out and returned, so I only had to watch the newly returned ones. Generally, that was about 4 movies a night. My schedule flipped to accommodate working a night shift. I slept during the days, just to show up in time for work. I'd be lying if I said I hadn't considered ditching work entirely and pretending to watch the videos. But Murphy religiously watched the security tapes and would know if I slacked off even one night. Murphy had meant for me to throw away the tapes once I had found they'd been altered. But so much effort had been placed into editing them, I would honestly feel guilty if I didn't watch them to completion. I wondered how the teenagers possessed such patience to keep editing the damn videos. When I was that age, I could never work so hard at something with such little payoff. The teenagers gradually revealed themselves to be adept opponents, splicing more and more obscure moments of the films together. I burst out laughing every time a woman would moan, only for her voice to morph jarringly into Woody the Woodpecker's laugh. One particularly twisted editor altered an entire SpongeBob episode every few minutes. Some of the edits were just strange. One guy kept bleaching out the porn stars' faces on the film so that the movie would show these eerie white blobs in place of their heads. I found a copy of The Lion King, where a distorted female voice would constantly screech words throughout. I wanted to meet the people editing the tapes. They seemed like such a curious bunch. At least 6 months ticked by that I had spent playing that end of the pornography game. 6 months of meticulous searching and fixing what I could. I had developed quite the coffee addiction while sitting alone in the small office we called the video rental. My dim single bulb light cast its lonely beams out into the darkened building as the bleached-out humans lurched on my television screen. Sometimes I would swear I could hear noises coming from outside, and I would scurry into the main office to watch the security feeds. The grounds were always still, just an empty water park. I honestly can't say why I got so jumpy all the time. There was no money in the registers to steal anything. There's really no reason at all anybody else would ever break into the place. Still, my mind couldn't lose the notion that something was watching me. The paranoid feeling came stronger than ever when I arrived particularly late one Tuesday night. It must have been around 2 a.m. once my car pulled into the parking lot. I frowned to myself when my headlights shone on the rows of cars. Why were people still around at this hour? Nervously, I drove my car at a crawling pace to the nearest parking spot. I eventually convinced myself that Murphy must have rented out the lot or something, and I stepped gingerly out of my car and into the cold night air. I couldn't help but glance into the car windows to confirm that they were empty. Timidly, I walked by the numerous rows of cars. With clouds blocking out any moonlight, I felt my way to the entrance. Light leaked out from below the door crack, and my muscles tightened when I slowly opened the door. Bright interior light stung my eyes. It took a moment to adjust, in time showing me the empty inside of the building. There was nobody there, but everything had been left out as though people had left in a hurry. Food and drink sat on the table. The registers were opened with exposed money, and a soft buzz of television static flickered through the stale air. I called out sheepishly to see if anybody was still around, but there was silence. I went to the back room to check the security feeds. Each nook and corner taunted my nerve. Every shadow insulted my weakened bravery. To my surprise, I couldn't find any tapes once I entered the security room. Just a cooling mug of coffee, some old magazines, and a knocked-over ashtray. The ceiling fan spun slowly overhead as I paced back to the rental area. Indoor lights blocked out any visibility from the windows, concealing the outside with my reflection. I looked at my mirror image with distrust, sensing that something watched me from the other side of the glass. Turning away from the entrance, I scanned quickly over the movies, constantly looking back over my shoulder. Wind whistled through the door left hanging ajar from when I had entered. Quickly, I found that only a single tape had been moved into the rental stock. The Jungle Book. I grabbed the VHS, planning to get the hell out of there and watch the video at home, but the tape slid non-cooperatively out of the packaging and landed with a sharp crack on the floor. A moment hung over while I stared at the naked tape in confusion. It was the security tape, from just before closing. I pressed the tape into the VCR and watched the static-filled television screen cut to the video feed. I saw a grainy black and white overhead view of the large pool. The place seemed pretty crowded, with kids splashing around happily in the water. Parents chattered and lounged around the edge of the pool, and I could just barely make out a lifeguard station. I glanced behind me towards the door and windows. After some hesitation, I turned back to the television. The timestamp on the corner of the screen set the time to be around 5:30, as everybody went about their business around the pool. I watched the tape with uneasy curiosity until the time hit 6 p.m. At precisely 6 o'clock, everybody froze. The children stopped playing, the parents stopped talking, and the lifeguards stopped watching. Everybody's face shot up towards the sky. They stood in shock, as though unable to comprehend what they were seeing. Then at practically the same time, they all lost their shit, running and screaming in every direction. They fought chaotically to get out of the water like a pack of drowning rats. The children clawed and bit at each other in a feral frenzy to escape from the pool. It's impossible to describe the sheer terror in their eyes as they fled from the water. Neither the lifeguard nor the parents tried to help the kids in any way. They just screamed and sprinted off, out of frame. Before even a minute had passed, the shot was of an empty pool. At 5 after 6, the video then cut to static. After I left the shop and reported the incident to Murphy, we promptly contacted the authorities. A few men in suits spoke to me privately, and after I told them everything I saw, they essentially banned me from ever asking about or visiting the water park again. I've tried to talk to Murphy about it, but he's seemingly dropped off the face of the earth since I told him about the tape. Nobody ever published any findings on the disappearances, and I've never found any of the people who edited the movies, and no traces of the park goers or the employees who vanished ever turned up, not even today. I never learned how the tape ended up in the rental area, or where the rest of the tapes went off to. Really, I barely know anything at all about what happened aside from what I saw with my own eyes. All the unknowns have been driving me mad since then, and I'm not alone. For the few weeks following the event, random people in town would just break down crying and shaking. Their faces keep me from sleeping soundly, eating in peace, or even holding down a steady job. Even more than their despair-ridden expressions, though, one question in particular has always bothered me the most. On the tape, what were all those people looking up at? When I was younger, I found a fetish porn site called Don'tWakeThem.com. This was around 2010, 2011-ish, when I was 13. You might be wondering why a 13-year-old was on a site like that. Well, I had unrestricted internet access and I was a weird kid. So what? The site was very Web 1.0, with a black background and the site's title at the top of the page. Everything was written in Comic Sans. The site had pictures of people, usually women, sleeping with the sleeper's name under each image. I assumed this was a fetish site because a lot of the people shown were wearing clothes. Now, some were naked, sure, but it wasn't an outright sexual way. It was more like they were just sleeping in the nude. I think the thing that people were interested in was the sleeping. The pictures, from what I remember, were taken in the sleeper's bedroom. The room was dark, but you could still see the sleeper because the photographer used a flash. Not sure if that woke that person up since the only pictures posted are those where the subject is sleeping. I remember checking out the site a couple of times, mainly to skip to the pictures of naked women. Listen, when you're a teenage boy and curious, it is what it is. However, I didn't visit too often since the general vibe of it creeped me out. It was voyeuristic in a way that made my skin crawl. I ended up moving on from the site and I forgot about it for years. I eventually weaned myself off my porn addiction, though not before getting a monster of a virus on the family computer, and instead focused on trying to get a girlfriend. Anyway, let's fast forward to a couple of days ago. I I was listening to a podcast advertise Casper mattresses, which somehow reminded me of don'twakethem.com. A bunch of old memories popped into my head and I decided to look it up. The site doesn't exist anymore, instead taking you to a page listing similarly named sites. On a lark, I decided to put the URL in the Wayback Machine and go back to 2011. The familiar black background and Comic Sans text popped up, along with a ton of images of sleeping people. It was just as weird as I remembered. However, I noticed something this time that I hadn't over a decade ago. All the bedrooms looked different. Now that may not sound like much, but for a site that appeared to specialize in very low budget fetishes, that means a lot. These productions tend to just reuse the same sets, which are usually just someone's apartment. Here though, every bedroom looked different. The walls were painted a different color depending on the image. Some bedrooms had windows while some didn't, and none of the bedrooms had their furniture arranged in the same way. Maybe it was a bunch of people doing this independently in the same style. They'd take their picture and send it here. That seemed like the most logical and least creepy explanation. Morbidly fascinated by the site, I kept scrolling through it. There were dozens upon dozens of images of people sleeping, all taken in that weirdly voyeuristic way. As I was scrolling, I came across a picture of someone who had the same bed sheets as I did as a kid. Actually, that kid had the same posters in his room as I did as well, and the same action figure on his nightstand that I did. With growing dread, I looked at the name under the image. It was mine. What in the fuck? How did this site have this picture of me? It didn't look like a picture my family took. It was in the same style as every other image on the site, with that same camera flash. I looked for some sort of email or contact on the site but found nothing. I went ahead a bit on the Wayback Machine, hoping that maybe the site would list it later on. But the site only lasted until 2014, where it kept updating with new images. Its last image was a woman named Riley Ashcroft. But there was no contact information anywhere. Going back before 2011 didn't turn up anything either. I tried Googling the site to see if anyone had ever talked about it, and found basically nothing. It's like no one else knew about this site. I wasn't sure what else to do or where to even discuss something like this. I decided to try putting this weird site out of my head and hoped it'd make more sense in the morning. The next morning, after a light sleep, I checked the site on the Wayback Machine again. However, the site was no longer archived there. According to the Wayback Machine, someone had requested the site be removed. What the hell? Was the site taken down because I looked at it? How would someone even know that? Unless, maybe I didn't see the site. Maybe I imagined it, or mixed it up with a dream. Not sure how I'd do that, but at that moment it seemed like the best explanation. I mean, it's not like there was any proof that any of this existed outside of my head, right? I went about my day, trying and failing to put this entire thing out of my head. I put on some headphones and listened to a podcast to help myself sleep. I had nightmares of camera flashes. And that brings me to this morning. I saw that I got an email from someone going by Sleepyhead. Just that name made my stomach drop. Taking a deep breath, I opened the email. The only thing the email contained was a picture of me, taken while I slept, with that same signature camera flash. What really freaked me out was that, in the picture, I was wearing the same headphones I wore last night. It was me, again.